Have you ever wondered why we eat challah on Shabbat? Or why it's braided? Or why some people sprinkle salt on their challah before eating it? What about people not speaking between washing their hands and saying hamotzi? Give me a few minutes and you'll learn the answers to these questions and more. What most people call challah isn't technically challah. In Jewish law, challah refers to a small amount of dough that's removed when baking bread, and traditionally was set aside for the local kohen, or priest. Under the rules of challah, if you prepare about 1 liter worth of bread dough, you're required to set aside just under 3 tablespoons of the mixture. These days, instead of giving it over to the local kohen, it's simply burnt in the oven when baking. The bread that we call challah actually might have gotten its name from a pagan goddess. In the 15th century, Austrian bakers used to make an enriched bread which was designed to represent the braided hair of the goddess Hola, a name which sounds an awful lot like the Hebrew word challah. At some point, the pagan origins of this special Hola bread faded into obscurity, but local Christians continued to eat it as a treat on Sundays. Seeing this practice, local Jews in the region took to buying this bread for their Shabbat meals, calling it challah and not hola. While the custom of eating challah on Shabbat has become the assumed norm throughout all Ashkenazi communities, Jews in other parts of the world eat other types of bread, borrowed from their host cultures. In Syria and Morocco, they eat khubz adi, a lightly sweetened, leavened pita. In Yemen, they eat lahoch, a fluffy, pan-steamed bread. And Persian Jews enjoy nun barbari, a thick, seasoned flatbread. Regardless of what type of bread you eat on Shabbat, the Torah is clear that you must have at least 2 of them on your table. This is based on the double portion of manna that fell from heaven on Fridays, so the Israelites would not need to go out and gather and prepare food on Shabbat. Instead, the Israelites would make enough food on Friday to last them through 2 days. This is why it's customary to see 2 chalot on the Shabbat table, both on Friday and Saturday. When buying your challah, or other bread of choice, you might face the decision of getting it sliced or not. Tradition states that one should bless over a whole loaf, so it's best to forego the convenience of pre-sliced bread. In fact, the challah should only be sliced or torn once the blessing hamotzi has been said. Some will slice just as finishing the blessing, but never before. Along these lines, you might have seen people run their knife along the bottom of the challah before saying hamotzi. This practice stems from the desire to check the doneness of the bread. While it doesn't really constitute a slice, it's still preferable not to do it, as it can be misinterpreted as slicing the bread before saying hamotzi. All right, we've got our bread of choice. We're setting the table, and now the bread is being covered. Why? Well, as I taught in my video on Friday Night Kiddush, one could say Kiddush over challah. So to avoid any uncertainty, we cover the challah when saying the Kiddush. It's nice to use a special cover for this, but if all you have is a paper napkin, that's fine. Alongside the challah cover, it's common to see a salt shaker or dish on the Shabbat table. This is because some people will sprinkle salt on their challah or dip the challah in salt. While this is a pretty tasty practice, it's actually a bit misguided. In the Torah, we're instructed to have salt present with our sacrifices. While one could understand the text to imply that the salt would go on the offering, really the salt simply needed to be on the altar, as salt was a crucial signifier of covenants in the ancient world. As challah has come to represent sacrificial offerings, and our tables stand in for the altar, you just need to make sure there's salt somewhere on your Shabbat table, not necessarily on your bread itself. But there's no reason to stop sprinkling salt if that's your current practice. That being said, there is one other condiment that the Talmud explicitly states should always be in your Shabbat dinner table, and that's roasted garlic. According to our sages, garlic makes one more virile, and as it's a mitzvah to be fruitful on Shabbat, the great scribe Ezra decreed that one should always have roasted garlic on Friday night dinner. Now, the table is set. We've lit the candles. We've said Kiddush. It's time to say hamotzi, but first, we must wash our hands. This reflects how the Kohanim would wash their hands before offering sacrifices. Many homes will have a special dual-handled cup for this mitzvah. The proper way to wash is to pick up the cup with your right hand, give a quick pour of water onto your left hand to clean away any filth. Then transfer the cup to your left hand and rinse your right hand up to the wrist, and then shift the cup back over to your right hand in order to rinse your left. These 2 rinses are repeated 2 more times per hand. In theory, you really only need to wash your hands nice and thoroughly, which can be done under a tap. But even if you do that, it's still good to symbolically rinse each hand once with the wash cup. Once your hands are rinsed, you bless Al Nitilat Yadayim, then raise your hands and dry them, as the blessing actually relates to these final steps, not the washing itself. Now, you might have found yourself sitting around a Shabbat table and were shushed if you spoke between washing your hands and saying hamotzi. This is because washing hands and eating is all one connected act, and we don't want to sever our intention when in the midst of this act. Therefore, it's customary not to speak at all until eating your bread. But it is permissible to speak if it pertains to the act of eating, such as, please pass the challah, or have you fed the dog yet? Other people will hum a melody to fill the void of silence, which is perfectly acceptable too. Finally, we're ready to say hamotzi. One person leads the blessing, everyone else says amen, and we wait for the leader to take a bite before anyone else begins their meal. And that's it. Now you know all about challah, how to say hamotzi, and what to expect at a traditional Shabbat meal. Thanks for joining me for this week's Taste of Torah.